Within just the last hour, President Biden called for an international investigation after a, quote, outrageous incident this weekend when the government of Belarus basically hijacked a commercial airliner as it flew between two European Union countries and then proceeded to kidnap passengers off that airliner. Belarus is a landlocked European country with Russia to the east, Ukraine to the south. Like other Soviet satellite states, it achieved independence in the early 1990s when the USSR collapsed. After a few years, in the country's very first election, a man named Alexander Lukashenko took power. He has been ruling Belarus ever since, winning, in quotation marks, 5 more elections, none of which were deemed free and fair by credible international observers. His nickname is Europe's last dictator. His closest ally is Russian President Vladimir Putin. Now, after Lukashenko got 80% of the vote last year, thousands of Belarusians took to the streets in protest. You may remember this. The crackdown against them was brutal. Human rights groups estimate that around 35,000 people have been detained since August. This weekend, Lukashenko's regime arrested another protester by calling in a fake bomb threat to the commercial airliner he was on and diverting his flight with a fighter jet. 26-year-old Roman Protasevich is a dissident journalist who fled Belarus 2 years ago. He had been living in Lithuania, where he continued to report on Lukashenko. Last week, he flew to Athens in Greece to meet with an opposition leader. And then on Sunday, he boarded a Ryanair plane to return home to Lithuania. The flight that he was on took him over Belarusian airspace, and it is in Belarusian airspace when the leader of Belarus, Lukashenko, sent a MiG-29 fighter jet up into the air to intercept his flight just minutes before it was going to cross into Lithuanian airspace. In fact, according to his own press service, Alexander Lukashenko, quote, personally ordered the fighter jet to escort the Ryanair plane to the Minsk airport in Belarus after a bomb threat. As the plane landed, one passenger said the dissident journalist started panicking, saying this was because of him. He just turned to people and said he was facing the death penalty. He was arrested along with his girlfriend. 3 other passengers believed to be members of the Belarusian security services, still, by the way, called the KGB, also got off the plane. No explosives were found, and the flight with the rest of the passengers on board was eventually allowed to leave to continue to its destination. Now, just a few hours ago, a video was released on social media that appears to show the journalist, gotta say hostage style, confessing to crimes that would carry a long sentence. It remains unclear what will become of him. It also seems clear that Europe's last dictator has stepped over a line here. I mean, using a fighter jet to stop a commercial aircraft flying from one EU country to another is an incredibly transgressive act. Julia Ioffe moved to the U.S. from the Soviet Union as a child. She's covered Russia, its neighboring countries, for much of her professional life as a journalist. She's now a correspondent for GQ, and she joins me tonight. I think, Julia, for folks that have sort of monitored this maybe in the background of their news consumption, know a little bit about Lukashenko, the brazenness here is really jarring. I'm wondering what your reaction was.
It was about that. When I saw the news yesterday, my jaw just hit the floor, and it took me a while to compose myself and, get the jaw back on my face. It's really, incredible, not just, calling in the fake bomb threat from Hamas and, using the Israeli-Palestinian conflict to further his own aims, sending a fighter jet to force a civilian airliner to land not where it was supposed to, outside of the European Union, just to arrest a 26-year-old journalist and his girlfriend. It's really breathtaking.
What's the context here in terms of both the sort of, in some ways, I can't tell if this shows desperation or confidence, right? So in one level, it's like confidence because you think you can get away with it. Desperation because you are so focused on this one 26-year-old journalist. He's such a threat to you. You need to get him. But what does this mean to you about Lukashenko and his relationship to the EU and to Russia?
So I think both Lukashenko and Putin are now in this phase where, if any gloves were on at any point, they are off and thrown away and long gone to the city dump. This is a fight for his survival after the August election that was widely believed to be rigged, and the mass protests, the biggest in Belarus's history, swept the country. He cracked down really hard, as you said. He arrested tens of thousands of people, many of whom, including the leaders of the opposition, remain in jail. People reported being tortured, raped, threatened with mock executions. And this also comes today. Lukashenko signed a law, a really insane media law, basically banning journalists from covering unsanctioned protests. So protests against Lukashenko, you can't cover as a journalist. If you get fined, you can't crowdfund your fine. You're not allowed to hyperlink to banned information. You can't run media organizations from outside the country. You also see this happening inside Russia, an unprecedented sweep against all kinds of journalists for just covering anti-Kremlin protests. Also using similar tactics of equating the opposition with terrorists and extremists a la ISIS and Al-Qaeda and the Taliban. These are men who want to stay at power at any cost, and they are throwing away any pretense that was left and any even nods to democratic norms.
Yeah, and Putin, I mean, it's been very clear, right, that he's sort of obsessed, and I don't think crazily so, right, this sort of domino theory of everything. I mean, Ukraine really, like, sent him around the bend. He has expressed in his own words, and I think probably seems to believe that there's essentially a vast, U.S.-led conspiracy to sort of overthrow these regimes on his doorstep, and that each one that goes, threatens him, imperils Russia. So clearly he's very invested in Lukashenko, and it does seem like, absent that investment, it's hard to imagine something this brazen happening.
Well, they've had a pretty kind of up and down relationship. I think Putin isn't always happy with Lukashenko and vice versa. They step on each other's toes quite a bit. I think what we are seeing here, I mean, the EU responded, he timed this very poorly to coincide with a big meeting of EU heads, and they responded by isolating Belarus. So no flights can fly over, basically no flights coming out of Belarus can land pretty much anywhere in Europe. This also affects Russian travelers who were used to traveling to Ukraine through Minsk, because there are no flights anymore between Kiev and Moscow. But I think it shows the limits of that the West has. Okay, they're going to put in some sanctions. Well, he's already known as the last dictator of Europe. There are already a bunch of sanctions. There are a bunch of sanctions on Putin. And, and if you have Russia in your corner and maybe China in your corner, does it really matter all that much what the U.S. and EU do? Yeah,
it's a really good point. We should say, we just showed that clip. The European Union began the process of banning Belarusian airlines from flying over the bloc's airspace or landing in the airports, effectively severing the country's air connection to Western Europe, which, again, that has some teeth to it. But, I kept thinking today, as I was sort of processing the news on this, about Jamal Khashoggi, who, Mohammed bin Salman had murdered, according to U.S. intelligence, in a foreign capital, right? Like not even in his own country.
A NATO capital.
A NATO capital. We have seen essentially the crackdown on Hong Kong protesters happen kind of just right in the open. This sort of testing of the limitations of sanction, condemnation, all these things seems to be a broader global phenomenon than necessarily just Lukashenko and Putin. And to your point, really says like, well, what exactly, what is going to stop people?
Yeah, and if you look at Belarus's main trading partners, it's mostly Russia, Ukraine, a little bit of Poland, and way down at the bottom is Germany, the Netherlands, et cetera. So, okay, you can impose some sanctions, but they're not trading with you that much anyway. The other thing is Vladimir Putin has been talking about this quite a while. He said it at the Munich Security Conference in 2007 that he was working toward a multipolar world where there wasn't just one country, i.e. the U.S., calling the shots. And he's getting it, right? Thanks to China, thanks to his own actions. It really waters down the power of any punitive measures that Washington and Brussels could take.